The submitted material makes a compelling case that corporate erasure of digital purchases, like Sony's upcoming deletion of Studio Canal movies, is directly driving consumers back toward digital piracy. It captures a highly timely frustration, especially with that September 1st, 2026 deadline rapidly approaching, but relying exclusively on globalist conspiracy frameworks to explain corporate behavior obscures the very real structural flaws of digital content licensing that readers desperately need to understand.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're diving straight into this critique because the stakes here are fascinating. But that foundation, it just needs a bit of structural reinforcement.
Right, because right now, the material uses that World Economic Forum quote, the "you'll own nothing and be happy" one, as the main driver for why Sony is doing this.
Exactly. For why they're pulling titles like Apocalypse Now or Terminator 2.
Yeah, and it just creates this overly simplistic sort of ideological villain. By anchoring the narrative to a globalist agenda.
It really does. It completely ignores the actual mechanism that's trapping consumers.
Right, which is...
We were talking about those insane 5,000-page end-user license agreements.
Oh, absolutely, the EULAs.
Yeah, and the incredibly messy reality of shifting distribution rights between storefronts like PlayStation and, content providers like Studio Canal.
I hear you, but I actually want to push back on that for just a second.
Okay, sure.
But isn't the WEF quote a highly effective hook for an audience already suspicious of corporate overreach?
Well, yeah, it is definitely an attention grab.
Right. It's provocative. If the author cuts that out and just talks about end-user license agreements, aren't they kind of trading a thrilling hook for a legal textbook?
I get that, but is there a risk that focusing solely on a coordinated globalist agenda might overlook the mundane, bureaucratic reality of extended rentals disguised as purchases?
Oh, that's a good way to phrase it. Extended rentals.
Yeah, because the reader doesn't need to be afraid of some shadowy organization, right? They need to understand the precise legal loopholes these companies use.
Just completely revoking ownership right under the consumer's nose.
Exactly. It's happening in broad daylight, which is honestly a far more terrifying reality. The piece really needs to expose that.
Okay, so you're saying the horror is in the mundane paperwork, not a smoke-filled room.
Precisely.
But how does the author actually write that without, putting the reader to sleep?
Well, you dissect the deception itself. Just think about how these deals actually function under the hood.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Yeah, like Studio Canal owns the rights to a movie, and they license those rights to Sony for a specific regional window, say 5 years.
Okay, and then the contract expires?
Right, and Sony doesn't want to pay massive renewal fees or server costs for content that isn't making new money. So they just pull the plug.
Just like that.
Just like that. And there are a few ways to really expose this problem. The author could contrast the upfront visual design of the PlayStation Store with that buried text in the terms of service.
Oh, I like that. Picture the user interface.
Exactly. There is this massive, brightly colored button that literally says purchase.
It doesn't say license for an indeterminate period pending contract renewals.
No, it says purchase.
That's a really great angle. You could just spend a paragraph exploring the psychology of that purchase button.
Yeah, because it relies on our traditional understanding of commerce, like buying a physical DVD at a store.
While the fine print just actively subverts it. And, there are other routes the author could take to ground this argument too.
Like what?
Well, alternatively, the author could compare this upcoming 2026 Studio Canal purge to the averted 2023 Discovery Channel purge.
Oh, right. The piece briefly mentions that Business Insider report where Sony almost deleted hundreds of Discovery titles.
Yeah, before they signed a last-minute deal. But right now, it just kind of glosses over it like a footnote.
It really does. But if they use that 2023 near miss to illustrate a pattern, it proves this isn't a one-off anomaly.
Exactly. It shows how these shifting legal arrangements are the true, persistent threat to consumer digital ownership.
It's a structural flaw built right into the digital economy. And if you trace the paper trail of these EULAs, the argument becomes completely impenetrable.
You aren't asking the reader to believe in a grand agenda anymore.
No, you are simply asking them to read the contract that Sony forces them to agree to. It empowers the reader.
Which naturally brings us to the next point. Friending piracy solely as a reactive consumer convenience misses a profound opportunity to present it as a vital act of media preservation in the face of corporate digital erasure.
I definitely noticed this weakness too. The source material basically argues that, buying digital media is getting frustrating.
Right, so more and more people are just searching for movies on pirate sites to save time and money.
Yeah, it calls pirate sites a basic alternative to buying, which is a very common but kind of slightly dated take.
Totally dated. I mean, if Sony can arbitrarily delete purchased copies of Hot Fuzz or American God Season 1 from tens of thousands of accounts in Europe and the UK,
Without even offering a refund?
right, without a refund, then piracy is no longer just about trying to save a buck.
It fundamentally changes the moral equation. If the legal marketplace is operating in bad faith, stepping outside of it takes on a completely different meaning.
Precisely. It becomes about archiving media that is being actively and intentionally destroyed by the platform itself.
Yeah, the author needs to suggest reframing this modern shift toward pirate sites as an ad hoc consumer protection movement.
We really need to elevate the stakes here. The reader has to understand that piracy is a direct, necessary response to the illusion of digital ownership.
Because if legal storefronts are acting as black holes where culture just disappears, then underground networks become the de facto libraries.
I love that, the de facto libraries.
Yeah, and there are a couple of approaches to fix this. For example, the author could introduce the concept of rogue archivists.
Oh, rogue archivist, that's a great term.
Right? These are users who download a film like Evil Dead or RoboCop, not to cheat the system, but specifically because legal avenues literally delete the files from their hard drives.
They are operating out of a sense of cultural duty.
Exact. Making sure these pieces of media don't vanish into the ether just because a boardroom negotiation failed.
Let me offer an analogy here, because I think it helps crystallize what you're saying.
Go for it.
It's like buying a physical book, placing it on your shelf in your living room, and 3 years later, the publisher sneaks into your house and burns it.
Wow. Yeah.
Suddenly, the person illegally photocopying that book isn't a thief. They're a librarian.
That perfectly captures the sheer absurdity of the situation. And another option to really drive that point home.
Yeah?
The author could lean heavily into that phrase, extended rental from the Sony example, to argue that, ironically, piracy is now the only guaranteed form of permanent ownership.
That is a fascinating paradox. The legitimate market offers temporary rentals disguised as ownership.
While the black market offers actual, permanent ownership disguised as theft.
Right, because if you buy Paddington on the PlayStation Store, you have a ticking clock on your access to it.
Determined by server maintenance costs you have no part in. But if you download it to an external hard drive via a torrent,
It is yours until the hard drive physically degrades.
exploring that irony just pushes the piece beyond a simple complaint about corporate greed. It turns it into a philosophical examination of ownership.
And the material is hovering right on the edge of that realization, too. I mean, it lists all these titles: Highlander, Rambo, First Blood, Sharknado.
Just to show the sheer scale of the upcoming 2026 purge.
But right now, it's just a dry list. If the author frames piracy as preservation, that list becomes a catalog of endangered media.
We aren't just losing access to a file. We are watching our cultural touchstones be held hostage.
It raises the emotional stakes immensely, and it sets the reader up to view the pirate not as a freeloader, but as an essential actor in preserving history.
It's an entirely fresh angle, and it's completely supported by the evidence already on the page.
So if pirate networks are the new libraries, are they perfect? Well, no. Which brings us to the next point. Introducing the specific grievance about limited Hebrew translations on pirate sites abruptly derails the central argument regarding digital ownership without sufficient connective tissue.
Yeah, that transition was rough, really rough.
Let's look closely at the section discussing this. We go from a massive structural breakdown of the Sony PlayStation Store purge straight into a highly specific complaint about struggling to find Hebrew dubs and subtitles.
Right. For South Korean and Japanese shows on pirate networks.
It feels like a jarring non sequitur. The reader is yanked abruptly from a global debate on property rights into a localized accessibility gripe.
It completely diffuses the momentum of the essay.
I almost wonder if they should just cut this section entirely to keep the piece lean.
Well, I wouldn't cut it. It's actually a really compelling observation, but the connective tissue is entirely missing.
So how do we fix it?
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of corporate failure versus community reliance?
Okay, corporate failure versus community reliance. Expand on that.
The author needs to integrate this translation complaint into that broader theme. Use this section to explore the limitations of the pirate ecosystem, rather than just complaining about it in isolation.
Oh, I see. So don't just complain about the problem. Analyze why the problem exists within the context of the larger argument.
Exactly, because right now, it reads like two separate journal entries just kind of spliced together.
Yeah, it does. But there are a few ways they could organically bridge this gap. For example, They could explicitly state, while pirate sites protect media from corporate deletion, they leave non-English speakers behind, relying on volunteer translation networks that prioritize English over languages like Hebrew.
That instantly contextualizes the complaint. It frames the lack of Hebrew subtitles not just as a personal annoyance, but as a systemic vulnerability.
It shows that relying on unregulated networks for our media consumption has a massive blind spot.
Right. The rogue archivist model isn't perfect. Another method is to contrast the global, sweeping reach of Sony's corporate deletions with the localized, fragmented gaps in those pirate communities.
Showing the reader that while piracy solves the ownership problem by ensuring the file doesn't disappear, true media democratization hasn't fully arrived.
Because the infrastructure relies on unpaid volunteers who simply don't have the bandwidth to localize everything.
That makes total sense, but could the evidence also support a slightly different, maybe even more uncomfortable conclusion?
What do you mean?
Like the idea that corporate streaming, despite all its terrible flaws, was actually subsidizing global accessibility in a way that piracy simply cannot match?
Oh, that's interesting. You mean giving the devil his due?
Exactly. You could argue that the one thing a massive conglomerate like Studio Canal or Sony can do effectively is throw millions of dollars at professional localization.
Right. Subbing and dubbing across dozens of regions simultaneously.
And when consumers are forced to abandon those platforms because they revoke our ownership, we lose that subsidized accessibility.
The pirate community can save the video file, but they don't have the corporate capital to translate it for everyone.
That adds an incredible layer of nuance. Corporate platforms give us accessibility but deny us ownership.
While pirate platforms give us actual ownership, but profoundly struggle with universal accessibility.
Yeah. And the connection between the global licensing issue and the local subtitle issue just isn't fully established in the material right now.
No, it's not. But by contrasting the two, the author elevates the piece into a deeply balanced critique of the entire modern media landscape.
It proves to the reader that there are no perfect solutions right now. We are caught between corporate overreach on one side and the fragmented limitations of the underground on the other.
It transforms what feels like a momentary distraction in the text into a profound concluding thought.
It really does. It allows the author to keep their localized example about Hebrew dubs for K-dramas, but deploys it as vital evidence of a much larger structural reality.
That is always the goal of a strong analytical piece, isn't it? Taking a highly personal observation and extracting the universal truth from it.
So that anyone, anywhere can understand the stakes.
Looking at the entire landscape of this material, the potential here is immense.
The core frustration is palpable, and the evidence regarding the looming 2026 Sony deadline is incredibly timely.
We just need to tighten the screws on the mechanics.
So to briefly summarize the core takeaways of our critique today, shifting the focus from WEF ideology to actual licensing mechanics, specifically EULAs.
Right. Exposing the legal loopholes and the deception of the digital purchase button makes the corporate threat undeniably real.
Exactly. Next, elevating the concept of piracy from mere convenience to essential media preservation.
By reframing the pirate as a rogue archivist, saving culture when corporate platforms act as extended rentals, the piece really raises the moral stakes.
And finally, building a thematic bridge to connect the digital ownership debate with the localized Hebrew translation issue.
Framing the subtitle issue as a structural limitation of community-driven pirate networks highlights that uncomfortable tension between corporate accessibility and decentralized ownership.
The actionable summary here is to implement these structural and thematic shifts to make the argument more robust, legally grounded, and cohesive.
We enthusiastically invite you to revise your material based on these notes and submit it back in for a future critique.
We really want to see how this evolves because you should never have to worry that the digital media you bought might just vanish into thin air.